Many members of San Diego's Syrian American community strongly favor a U.S. military strike against the Assad regime. Combat is just one of many factors in the rise of military suicides. Another may be hefty insurance payouts. And stray plastic bags are everywhere, including the ocean. Now San Diego considers joining other California cities in banning them. I'm Mark Sauer, and the KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome. It's Friday, September 13th. I'm Mark Sauer. Joining me at the Roundtable today are Tony Perry, San Diego Bureau Chief for the Los Angeles Times, KPBS reporter Susan Murphy, and KPBS Business and Environment reporter Eric Anderson. President Obama this week pushed his plan to punish Syria's dictator with a military strike for his alleged use of chemical weapons against civilians. Americans are deeply divided over the idea, but the debate took a sudden turn when a possible diplomatic solution emerged. Syria's chemical weapons would be seized and destroyed by the international community, an idea embraced by the Assad regime and its patron, Russia. But a vocal group of Syrian Americans here in San Diego were disappointed that plans were put on hold for an attack against Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Susan, first tell us who these folks are and why they support this military strike.
Many of these folks are from Syria. A lot of them have spent a majority of their lives living there. Some are here as immigrants, others are refugees. All seem to have family members who are still living there. A lot of them belong to the San Diego chapter of the Syrian American Council, which is an advocacy group pushing for a free and democratic society there. They say that there are 2,500 Syrians living in San Diego. They're pushing for a strike because they say their families are suffering greatly and they just simply can't take any more. They say that diplomacy won't work. It hasn't worked before. And they're basically desperate for action. They say there's no more time to waste.
So they really want a strike here, and they're not embracing this turn. What are they saying about contact with their families? Can they get in touch with them? Are there any way to get through over the internet? What's
Most
the
of
story
them
there?
say that they have not been able to be in communication with their families for at least 2 weeks. They say they believe that phone lines have been cut. Before the phone lines were cut, they say their families had no running water. There was very little food. Their families were afraid to go out into the streets for fear of being shot by al-Assad's regime. They say that they're basically living as hostages in their own homes. One woman told me about her grandmother who had fallen down some stairs to her basement, and there's no medical help. She was not able to have any kind of medical intervention. There was one young man who is here for college. His family remains there near Aleppo. He says that his little brother has been unable to go to school. They're malnourished. The parents are still trying to school him from the basement. So it's just
Really a
scene
desperate
of despair.
situation. Tony, you look like you were about to say something.
I was just wondering how these folks are doing. Are they assimilating to America? Are they like, say, the Iraqi immigrants that we've seen, getting that education, getting into the middle class, owning markets? Or are they still trying to kind of cope with this strange place called America?
Well, I think a lot of them have been here for a long time, so they consider themselves Syrian Americans. They say that they love America as much as they love Syria. They basically are living with a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear, a lot of worry. The unknown, they say, is just eating at them. Just day to day, they worry about the survival of their family members there.
Well, you wonder about, such a desperate situation, but then you sit and you think about a military strike. While all of us, suddenly you realize America's going in. You see the bombs, you'll see the reporting from this end. And how does that square with not knowing already what's going on with their families there?
Well, some of them say that they believe that these precision strikes will only target the military compounds and that their families will stay safe. So they think that a military strike is, the best solution.
I think, though, we have to be careful. We have seen in other circumstances, Iraq, for example, the emigres, the expatriates, they're a little more enthusiastic for America going and getting in the middle of a dispute in their homeland than maybe the rest of America is. They want America to go over there and expend money and blood to straighten things out in their homeland, even though they may or may not know specifically what we can do and what we cannot do. So I think we have to be careful. Our hearts go out for these folks, but we have to be careful in evaluating their wants and wishes.
Their perspective, yeah. Eric?
I got a sense from some of your reporting, Susan, that they were very strident in some of the goals that they had and some things that they would like to see happen.
Right. They have been rallying around San Diego. They've been passing out flyers and pamphlets, trying to educate people on who they are. They would love diplomacy if it would work, because they would, love to avoid any kind of strikes if possible. But they just believe that there's no more time for diplomacy. That they don't trust, this deal with the Russians. They just believe that military intervention is the only solution.
Time to take a strike. Susan, you've also reported this week on San Diego's congressional delegation. What were you learning in some of the stances from the various Republicans and Democrats who would ultimately, that debate was in the House until this diplomatic push delayed it for a time?
Right. Well, leading up to when Congress reconvened this week, Juan Vargas seemed to be the only one who was fully backing President Obama's proposal. The others were unsure. They remained undecided on how to move forward with Syria. They all stated they wanted to see the intelligence before making that decision. Now, Juan Vargas, he sits on the House Committee on Foreign Affairs. He had sat in on 2 different occasions in Washington on intelligence briefings. He felt confident that when his other colleagues were able to sit in on those briefings and read those reports, that they too would back the president. So we'll have to wait and see.
But yet you have Duncan Hunter, right? East County, a Marine who served in Iraq and Afghanistan. He came out with a very strong statement saying, no, it just doesn't fit. And he quoted the Colin Powell doctrine, 7 points. The first one being, is there a crucial American interest involved? And he said, even after the briefings, I don't see it. So we're spread all over the lot, I think, in San Diego. Juan Vargas, as you point out, he's for it. Duncan Hunter, not for it. Everybody else in the middle, really not sure. Davis, Peters, even Issa, just not sure.
Tony, I wanted to ask you, and this is a good segue into that, what's your sense of the military posture here? Obviously, they follow orders, but, we're a little war weary with our Pendleton Marines and the other military folks in this particular county. Any idea about their appetite for it?
I don't think they have a great appetite, but on the other hand, they follow orders. The Chief of Naval Operations came out and was talking to the sailors at North Island earlier this week, and he said, in a rather matter-of-fact tone, this is what we do. We train for it. We are where it matters, when it matters, and if the president gives the order, we'll do it. Not very gung-ho, not very kind of knife in your teeth, over-the-top boys kind of stuff, just a day at the office when you're in the business of putting the hurt on American enemies or protecting American interests. So I don't sense that they're really, patriotic fervor type. Yeah. They've done that. I mean, we did Iraq, we did Afghanistan, we're still doing Afghanistan. Right. These are technicians, people paid to do a certain difficult, bloody, oft-times job, and they do it, but they're not sort of jumping up and down, put me in, coach, put me in, coach.
We've got a few seconds left on this topic, and the polls are reflecting what you're talking about with the military. I mean, not a tremendous strong support for this. Right.
A majority of Americans oppose U.S. military strikes. I think some polls show more than 60%, up to 70% of Americans oppose. When I was at a recent rally outside of Congresswoman Susan Davis's office. One side were the Syrian Americans, the other side were people opposed to strikes. And some of them told me, they basically fear retaliation. They fear retaliation on U.S. soil. They don't want to get involved. Others say that we have no business getting involved. So it's definitely a hot issue.
So a hard sell. So the diplomacy's front and center now. All right, we're going to shift topics now. Sometimes there's a note laying out specific reasons. Often there is no real way to know what's going through the minds of the tortured souls who end up taking their own lives. Getting at the why of suicides is a particular challenge for the military community these days. Last year, 352 active duty service members took their own lives, more than double the number from a decade earlier. And now one new factor being looked at is the role life insurance might play in this. Tony, let's set these grim statistics. They've been going up. They've been going up for some time, but they've been spiking really in the last couple of years.
Indeed. 10 years ago, it was one of the boasts of the military that even though they are basically populated by young men, 18 to 24, that group that in the civilian community commit suicide at greater rates than other age groups, even though the military has that age group, their suicide rate was lower than the civilian community, similar demographics. Not true now. It's been going up and up and up, and now for several of the services exceeds the civilian community. Now, why? And as you point out, the why is devilishly difficult. It's devilishly difficult in the civilian community to figure out why people take this dreadful act of a permanent solution to a temporary problem, as they say. And the why is all over the lot. Many have served multiple deployments and have had the stress, but a lot haven't. In fact, most of the current suicides have not deployed. And indeed, those who have deployed didn't see direct combat. What do you make of that? Nobody knows. The President of the United States just a few weeks ago put some $107 million, as I remember it, into greater research on post-traumatic stress, traumatic brain injury. What's the role there? What can we do to help these folks as they come home or as they transition out of military service? This is an issue that is as current as today. There's a big conference going on in Washington, and as old as Sophocles. As you know, at wonderful first-rate universities like this one we're sitting at, the undergraduates read Sophocles, and there's a reason. 500 BC, Ajax, if you will, he comes home from war dramatically changed, and Sophocles points this out.
Isn't that the point, Tony, that it's that experience with war that kind of has been pointing at it, or is that
For
changing?
some, but what do you make of the fact that most of those committing suicide now in active duty military have not deployed? They didn't go to Iraq, they didn't go to Afghanistan. Well, what you're finding is the factors that push young civilian males, 18 to 24, to suicide are the same that push the military folks similar age. Broken relationships, the only woman in the world breaks up with them. Money problems, work problems, a little too much drinking and far too many drugs. All of those kinds of pathologies that lead young civilians now lead young military. What do you do about it? All sorts of counseling, all sorts of helplines, all sorts of discussions. It isn't a sign of weakness to seek help. And there are some small signs that it's working. The Navy, for example, the Navy was saying this week that they're seeing a downturn in their numbers. That could uptick again, but there's no laying off the problem. It's there, it's real, they're doing what they can. Enough? Probably not, but they're doing what they can.
I just wanted to bring up the one point on, as your newspaper had a story on, the LA Times had a very interesting story on this factor that could be there, which is this insurance rate. Tell us about that.
Indeed, one of my very good colleagues, Alan Zarembo, had a story in which he pointed out that other studies in other countries, to be sure, of civilians have found that insurance, that is to say, when someone knows that their family will be taken care of, this may be a factor. Now, nobody is...
And give us those rates. They've gone up substantially recently.
In 2005, they went up, I think, $150,000, so that a service member now who dies, his family gets some $400,000. It's more if you're in a war zone. So there's an economic aspect to a lot of conduct. Nobody at this point that we know of is studying this, but it's certainly intriguing, to say the least. But there's a lot of these kinds of things, and if we're looking for one common cause, I'm just not sure that we're going to find it, but people are looking.
So a lot of folks, I mean, this, as you noted, is reflected in the civilian population. A lot of folks are under enormous stress, tough job market, of course, the terrible Great Recession we've just had. A lot of people went into the military because it was a job, it was benefits, it was a career.
The military folks have access to weaponry. They have been part of a culture that has trained them in the use of weaponry. They're part of a culture that has suggested that some problems can be solved through the use of weaponry.
And a culture that maybe doesn't allow you, it's still kind of taboo, is it not, to go and talk about your feelings, get into a group session, admit that you have feelings?
They say over and over, they start in boot camp right out here at Marine Corps Recruit Depot San Diego. They tell the recruits as they sit on their bunks, if you have a problem, tell the sergeant, who will tell the chaplain, who will tell the corpsman. Also, look to your buddy. If your buddy is talking about life has no meaning, starts saying he's going to give away his favored truck and water skis or whatever, do something. Don't just sit there. Do something. They start lecturing them in boot camp. Still a problem. Still a problem. And people who study this say it's going to be with us forever, of course. I mean, Sophocles, 500 BC, it was there. It's going to be with us. The idea, though, is let's see if we can stop the numbers from ratcheting up.
Is it also the stress of boot camp in the first couple of years in being in the military?
Oh, sure. Boot camp is by its necessity a stressful place. It's meant to be. You are getting ready to do a very dangerous job, locate, close, engage, and kill people. It's stressful, meant to be stressful. Boot camp suicides are relatively low, but What is higher is folks that get a little further up the chain, a year, 2, 3 years, into service, and just don't see a way out. Have money problems, have relationship problems, drinking. So I saw one figure: 20% of those committing suicide in the military have been heavily drinking just prior, and then you throw in some drugs, some cannabis, whatever, and you've got a mess of a problem.
I did want to ask you particularly, and I'm glad you brought up the heavy drinking. Times had a marvelous story on the front page on Sunday. In fact, I shared it Monday with all of our staff. Many people had already read it. Terrific story. I'm sure it'll be a candidate for prizes. And it talked about this couple that the reporter and photographer had followed for, I think, 14 months. And you talk about a candidate, it would seem, for suicide and finally a long intervention. Tell us a little bit about that story.
Well, as you point out, that was a wonderful story, long look. Christopher Gaffard and Rick Loomis, the photographer, spent a lot of time with this family, particularly the wife, and how she stuck with him, even though he came home and brought the war home with him, is the tagline.
He certainly did.
And alcohol and PTSD and an outreach, and it didn't work, and then some driving while under the influence, then some criminal time. They went through hell. Yeah. And again, not to...
Lost homes, shut off electricity, all sorts of
problems. No, he did
problems.
get treatment, and buried deep in the story, you find out he has gotten 100% disability from the VA, the much criticized VA. Occasionally,
which he really had to fight for, though.
Had to fight. They don't give that tax money away freely. You've got to really prove it to them. But it's a very deep, very moving look at what happens to a certain number of men and women when they come home from war. And it was, if anyone missed it, go look it up on the website. You're going to learn a lot about the cost of war and what the love of a good woman in this case can do to counteract that.
And of course, it brings up this clash from coming out of this combat zone and this whole combat world back into the civilian world. And there's been good movies and novels and things, and have been with previous wars. And as you say, it's
a structured world with its value systems intact, but a world where there's violence and craziness and irrationality and all of that. And then you come home to San Diego, California, and we worrying to death the fact that the Chargers lost. There is a culture crunch. Also, now, to be honest, if, as this fellow did, you enter military service, the Army in his case, at a little bit of an advanced age, you may bring with you certain issues which are incompatible with military service. And this has been studied by the suicide folks, too. This fellow did not commit suicide and seems to be on the track to getting it together with his wife and stepchildren and their new baby. But there have been studies that suggest that it's one of the factors is, well, who's committing suicide? What did they bring with them when they came into military service?
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. I would recommend that story highly in the LA Times. We're going to shift gears now. More and more shoppers can be seen entering stores with their own bags these days. They bring recycled bags from home, and it's not just the Birkenstock crowd at Windmill Farms or Whole Foods. Still, countless plastic bags are used every day here and elsewhere, fouling the environment on the land and the sea. City leaders in San Diego this week started doing something about that. A city council committee took up the matter of a ban on plastic bags and then agreed to draft an ordinance. So, Eric, give us the details about this ordinance to start out with. What exactly would it require?
Well, the ordinance hasn't actually been drawn up yet. That's what the city staff is in the process of doing. But what they're looking at doing is eliminating the single-use plastic bags at all grocery stores and big box realtors. So if you go to a Target or a Walmart or a Vons, you're going to have your own bag, or you could pay 10 cents for every paper bag, to go back to the old school way a little bit. Every paper bag that you would use
which can,
would cost
of course,
you a dime.
be recycled or reused.
Which can be recycled, it can be reused, et cetera. But the idea is to take this item, this controversial item, out of the waste stream so that it doesn't end up in landfills, so that it doesn't end up as litter around the town.
And what are some of the exemptions that are being talked about as they craft this thing?
There are some things. Restaurants, for example, would still be allowed to use the single-use plastic bags. Even grocery stores, they could still use them for produce or for meat. If you're a person on food stamps and you went into the store, they're talking about possibly waiving that 10-cent fee to pay for the extra bag. But I think the idea is to get people to wrap their heads around this idea that that it's not a right to have the grocery bags given to you at the store, that you kind of play a little role there and have some responsibility, and that's good for the environment and for the city's coffers.
I read that one of the city council members, he's worried that this will impose a burden on private industry unfairly and could hurt economic growth, et cetera, et cetera. That real, or is that just Chamber of Commerce spooky talk?
Well, I don't think it's spooky talk. I think that
we love the word spooky talk.
I think what you look at is what's the real world impact going to be, and folks like the California Grocers Association, they're behind the ban with a condition. What they're really, and they were in front of the council this week too, and what they're saying is, look, we think it's okay. I think we can live with this idea if it's something that everybody plays by those rules. In other words, if everybody has the same thing. There are about 80 municipalities now in the state of California that have some form of restriction on single-use plastic bags. And the thing that the industry folks are looking at is they're saying, look, we just don't want to be in a situation where a store on one side of the street has to follow these rules and a store on another street perhaps doesn't, and that creates some kind of a competitive imbalance.
Susan?
Has there been any talk of where these bags will be manufactured, the reusable bags? I know in Los Angeles with the 1 million bag giveaway, they had veterans and gang members making these bags. It could be a job growth opportunity. Is there any talk of that yet?
I'm sure that there are a lot of recycled bag companies that are very anxious for this kind of a legislation to pass. I think the big question though, when you look at this is when is it going to happen at the statewide level? It's great to have the local legislation, but it really is limited in its impact. You don't really have that big effect. And there has been a push that they've been getting closer and closer to getting the support for a statewide ban. And I think that the public discourse now is at a point where it's hard to find people who will stand up and say, we really need these plastic bags to go forward.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the need for this and why all these cities are doing it and why there's a push for it now. I mean, this stuff really does get into the environment and it really lasts a lot of years, and it gets into the ocean to an extraordinary extent.
And there's a lot of research coming out now. A lot of marine mammals that have been dissected, caught in the ocean, dissected. They have plastic in their stomachs. It's not just from the single-use plastic bags, but they're a contributor. There's talk of this huge patch of garbage that is floating out in the Pacific Ocean.
Huge Pacific being, I mean, maybe the size of the United States. It varies.
It might not be what you would initially picture as something that you could see from outer space, for example. But out in the middle of the ocean where the currents kind of eddy, there are particles of plastic that are floating just beneath the surface, and that gets into the food chain, and that's a big concern. But I think that the bottom line for folks like the city of San Diego is that it costs money. It costs the city money to clean up bags in the environment, to clean them up at parks, to clean them up at beaches, to clean them up at the landfill. When you dump all those bags into the landfill, they blow around. It's not high science out there when you're dumping and piling garbage.
But might the public say, "Hey, I'm already recycling. I'm putting my my diet soda cans and such in one can and my garbage in another."
Newspapers.
Might there be a environmental collapse here?
Well, I think just take it back a few years. Plastic bags didn't exist, before 15 to 20 years ago. So that's a relatively new phenomenon. We got used to the idea of plastic bags. I think that people can get used to the idea of going back to the paper bags or the recycled
Only
bags.
if they have handles.
It's an educational process, I think.
A lot of them do have handles. The ones I get have the handles. Now, you said that the grocery stores, they're not really against this as long as everybody's playing by the rules. Well, who is against it right now? I would imagine the manufacturers of the bags might be.
Well, the agency that really funded the effort to defeat this at the state level was the American Chemical Council. And that's an industry group that represents petroleum products maker, the people who make the bags. They make a lot of these bags, billions of bags just in the state of California every year.
The scope of it's hard to get your mind around just how many of these bags are out there.
It's billions of bags in the state of California. That's a lot, a lot of bags. So there's a financial stake there. But I think what you'll see is that it's becoming, the opponents' voices are becoming quieter because people are less receptive to their arguments.
Okay. And have we seen what the polls are now? Or they're kind of split, if I recall from some of your reporting.
Well, if you look at where it is legislatively, 80 communities in the state of California have decided to go ahead with some sort of a restriction on these single-use plastic bags. It has failed twice at the statewide level, but it is expected to be back on the docket again in January. And the vote, it lost by 7 votes. The first time it lost by 4 votes. The second time, so I think that you can kind of see that the momentum is moving.
What about here in
that
the
direction.
city? How does the council stack?
Here in the city right now, the majority of the members of the Rules Committee want to look at this proposal, so they're going to have a proposal to look at. They're going to be back in October, where that committee will see the ordinance that's drawn up, and then they'll give it to the city council to make that final decision. We haven't polled the council members yet, but again, I think it's a case of momentum. A lot of people kind of see the arguments on some sort of restriction, and the voices against those restrictions are starting to fade a bit.
All right, we're going to wrap it right there. That wraps us up for another week here on the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Susan Murphy and Eric Anderson of KPBS News, and Tony Perry of the Los Angeles Times. A reminder, you can find all the stories we discussed today on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer, Senior News Editor at KPBS, and thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.